and welcome to class. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 1, which is on communication, what and why. So first let's talk about what communication is. There are 4 components or aspects to what makes communication communication. The first is that communication is symbolic. What that means is that symbols are something that represents things, processes, ideas, or events. And symbols are what makes communication possible. Communication also is a process. What that means is that it's continuous, it's ongoing. Think of, rather than a photograph, think of a movie. Communication is a series of photographs strung together or events strung together to make a larger, longer event possible. Communication is also irreversible. What does that mean? It means that you can't undo, you can't unsay what's already been said. Many of you are very familiar with a time when you sent a text message or you sent an email and then you desperately wish you could have reached into the receiver's inbox and retrieved that message. So once you say something, you can't unsay it. And also, communication is relational and not individual. What does that mean? It means communication is something we do with people and not to people. So, for example, one cannot be attractive without others who are attracted to you. One cannot be a leader without people who are willing to follow the leader. So those are 4 aspects of communication that you need to know. Now let's talk about models of communication. There are 2 models we're going to discuss today. One of them is the linear model, which was the original model, and then one is the transactional model. The linear model was very simple. There was a sender that encodes an idea and conveys that to a receiver who decodes the idea. And the idea is in the form of the message. Now, the message is conveyed via a channel. The channel could be either face-to-face, which is the richest form of communication, or it could be through a mediated format. And the mediated form of communication could vary. It could be video, it could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a text. Mediated means that something, quote unquote, something exists between the sender and the receiver. So anything that's not face-to-face communication is mediated. Now, noise is a very important part of the linear model, and noise is anything that can disrupt communication and make the receiver not intend the message as originally intended by the sender. Now, there are different types of noise that you should be aware of. The first is external, the second is physiological, and the third is psychological. So external noise would be, for example, a baby crying or the sound of a lawnmower. Physiological are biological factors within a person. So, for example, if you're sick or you're tired or you're hungry, those things are going to prevent you from being fully present and be able to listen. And the last type of noise is psychological noise, which is very hard to turn off. That's the noise inside your head. Those are your thoughts and feelings that are constantly flowing in your brain. And finally, the last part of the linear model is your environment, the environment of the sender, the environment of the receiver, and how they overlap. So the physical location that the people are in, the personal experiences of the sender and the receiver, their cultural backgrounds, and so much more. So it seems rather simple. A linear comes from the word line, so the sender sends the message to a receiver through a channel. But something very vital is missing, which we're going to discuss now in the transactional model. The transactional model has all the elements of the linear model, but it encompasses one important factor, and that is feedback. Feedback is the receiver's perceptible response to a message. And think about it. Communication isn't something we do to someone. It's something we do with someone. So the receiver just doesn't receive the message. The receiver responds to the message. So the transactional model operates on the premise that we send and receive messages simultaneously. And the feedback can be verbal, it could be nonverbal, it could be a combination of both. And it also may be intentional or unintentional. As we talk more about nonverbal communication, you'll come to realize that it's a lot harder to control our nonverbal. So how you're feeling may come out even if you're trying to hide that. So let's talk about communication context. There are various types of communication that we're going to be studying this semester. And the first is intrapersonal. Now, intrapersonal is communication within oneself. And yes, we do talk to ourselves. You know this. We do this all the time, right? We have a little voice inside our head. That's intrapersonal. Interpersonal is communication between two people, and that's also known as a dyad or dyadic communication. The next type of communication that we're going to be studying together this semester is small group communication. And in a small group, every person can actively participate with the other members in the group. And once you have 3 people, technically that is a group. You may have 5 or 6 people in your group, and that's okay. But if you have 3 people, it is considered a small group. Now, organizational communication is when a group of people works collectively together to achieve goals, usually in a business setting. So it could be a corporation, it could be a nonprofit organization, it could be a political organization, it could be a health organization such as a hospital, and it can even be a school or a school setting such as Georgia Highlands College. Now, public communication occurs when a group is too large for all the members to contribute equally, as in when audiences listen to a lecture. So a public communication has a rather large audience. And speaking of large audiences, the last type of communication context is mass communication. And that's when messages are transmitted to large, widespread audiences via electronic and print media. So it could be the web, it could be the radio, it could be television, it could be magazines, newspapers, film. So that mass communication reaches a lot of people. Now, let's talk about social media. I'm pretty sure that many of you use different types of social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and there are some unique contexts to using social media. So let's talk about that. The first is that your audience size will vary vastly depending on what format you're using of social media. Now, you can have friends, you can have followers, and you may know these people and you may not. So from a few of your friends in a group text that you chat in daily to thousands and even millions of people that you may reach through your tweets on Twitter or through videos that you post on your YouTube channel, you can see that the audience size will vary greatly depending on how many people follow you. Now, what's interesting also about social media is that users can generate their own content. So what does that mean? You might have heard of a term called Web 2.0. And what that means is that there's a capability of everyday people to not only consume mediated messages that were created by others, but to also create their own content that they decide goes on their page or their story. And with that being said, you need to be very careful on what you do put out there on your Facebook page or your Instagram or your Snapchat or your Twitter, because people are watching and people are reading, and these people are going to be your future employers one day. So be very careful what you post and how you represent yourself. And also, the last component of social media, of the context that we're talking about, is that your networks can be highly diverse. So what does that mean? It means that this notion challenges the idea that we communicate differently with our close friends than with complete strangers. So think about the people you follow on Twitter. You might follow your favorite athlete or actor or actress, and you're getting a feed from your friends and from friends of friends and from strangers and from celebrities. So your audience is very diverse in that manner. Now, speaking of social media, I'm now going to share with you 5 tips for using social media well. So the first is to choose the best medium for your message. You might have heard the saying, the medium is the message. The way you choose to send your message and the format you choose is very, very important. You also, secondly, want to think about what you post before you post it. Remember, you can't unsay it. I mean, I guess you could delete your post or delete your tweet. You can't delete your text. But you really want to think before you post, because if it's going to be hurtful or offensive to an audience, then you may want to reconsider that. Speaking of your audience, you want to adapt to them. This is very important in human comm and in public speaking, another course that I teach. You are going to be doing presentations, and the most important facet of any presentation that you give is your audience, who they are, why they're here, why they care, and why they should listen to you. So you should always keep them in mind. You also want to respect your audience's need for undivided attention, and you also want to keep your cool. It seems that in this day and age, there's just a lot of anger, there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of negativity on people's social media. So try and keep it positive. Try and post something that's going to enlighten someone, that's going to uplift someone. There's a lot of negativity in this world, so try and make your contributions positive. And if someone makes you angry, don't let that escalate, because that's just not going to be a good thing to get into a social media fight with someone. Now, I want to talk about communication competence and what that is and why it's important and why I want to help you become a more competent communicator. So when we talk about building communication competence, it's using communication to achieve goals in a manner that ideally maintains and possibly enhances the relationship in which it occurs. So think about it. Communication is something that you do daily. You're going to be able to practice it and get better at it. So here are some things that I want you to think about in terms of being a competent communicator. The first is, there's no ideal way to communicate. So there's no right way and there's no wrong way. Think about it. Some people are naturally funny. Some people are very serious. Some people are straight up and they're not going to sugarcoat anything. They're just going to tell you how they feel. And other people are subtle. And all of these people can be great communicators. So there's no ideal way to communicate. The best is to adapt to your audience, to your sender, to your receiver. You're the sender. You need to think about who you're talking to and adapt your message to that person or those people if it's more than one. The second thing I want you to know is that competence is situational. So it's not something that you either have or don't have, or you're born with it, or you don't have it. You can learn it. And it's adaptable to many different situations. It's degrees of competence. So people can be adept in certain areas of communication and not in others. But like I said before, it's something that you're going to be practicing and developing throughout the semester. And my goal is to have you be a better communicator on the last day of the semester than you are on the day that you're watching this lecture. Also, communication competence is relational. We talked about that. Communication is something we do with someone and not to someone. So with that transactional nature, we need to keep that in mind. And also the context or the setting of the communication and the cultural backgrounds of the communicators also impact the communication competence. Also, competence, as I said earlier, is learned. No one is born being an excellent communicator. It's something that you work on. Next, communication competence and its communicators are flexible. I cannot emphasize this enough. If there is one thing I can tell you for certain about our world is that it's uncertain, that it's changing. You need to be flexible, you need to be adaptable, and you need to choose the appropriate behavior for the context and for your audience. Another aspect of a competent communicator is that they're empathetic. They see things from others' points of view. Remember, it's not all about you, it's your audience, and you need to put yourself in their shoes to become a more competent communicator. Also, competent communicators contain cognitive complexity. So let me explain what that means. When you're cognitively complex, it means you can understand different perspectives. You can acknowledge that there might be another answer to the problem. It's not just a one size fits all. You need to look at something from different angles and different perspectives to be a competent communicator. Also, competent communicators self-monitor. So what does self-monitoring mean? It means that a person pays close attention to their behavior and how people are reacting to their behavior, and then they're able to adjust their behavior accordingly based on how they're being received. And then lastly, competent communicators are committed. Committed means that they're committed to the relationship, they're committed to the person, they're committed to the conversation, and that they are sharing, that they want to understand the person that they're speaking with and see it from their perspective, and they're trying to make the best of the situation and make sure that their receiver understands their message and that they're being understood and that it's being reciprocated. So lastly, I'm going to wrap up with some myths that people have about communication. So the first is that communication requires complete understanding. So let me give you an example. If someone says, "How's it going?" That's a pretty common saying that we say to each other, right? But do you really want to know how it's going with that person, or are you just saying a pleasantry or a nicety? So sometimes people say, "Oh, fine," and really it's not fine. Or if, for example, you're invited to a party or an event and you respond with, "I can't make it," when the real answer is, "I don't want to go." But it's easier just to say, "I can't make it." Also, the next myth is that communication can solve all problems. Now, let me tell you, communication is important, and I believe it is, but it is not a guaranteed cure-all that it can solve every problem, but it does help. So I'm here to help you become a better communicator. Also, another myth about communication is that all communication is good. We know this is not so, right? Communication is neither good nor bad. It's how you use it. So the good news is it's something you're going to do every day of your life, and I'm here to help you become a better communicator. The next myth is that meanings are in words, that they're in the words that people say. And I'm here to tell you that is absolutely wrong. Meanings don't rest in words. They rest in the people who say them. So, for example, if I were to say, "John is loaded," well, what does loaded mean? Does it mean he's loaded with money? Does it mean he's carrying a gun? Does it mean he has a fat bank account, or all three? Well, depending on what your definition of the word loaded means, that's how you're going to interpret that message. So you need to know the person who's saying the word and not the word itself. Another myth is that more communication is always better. No, not necessarily. I'm sure many of you have talked to death a problem and not have come to any conclusion. So more communication is not always better and is not always the solution, but it's how you communicate. And then the last myth about communication is that it is simple. And unfortunately, it's not. It's very complex. It's very complicated. There are a lot of moving parts. You're going to learn a lot more than you initially thought about communication before taking this course. I'd like to compare communication to athletic ability. It's something that you need to practice and get better at. And the good news is that you will. Every single day, you have opportunities to communicate with your friends, your family, your coworkers, your loved ones, your romantic partner, and this class is going to help you become a more competent communicator, a more confident communicator, and I look forward to spending the semester with you.